Now, this might be one of the most controversial videos I've ever done on our YouTube channel. This is very divisive. It runs deep. It splits people right down the middle. Should you or should you not? And it causes people to not even move to the state of Arizona potentially because they dislike it so much. On the flip side, you have people who absolutely love them and wouldn't ever go without. So what are we talking about here today? No, it's not politics. It's actually HOAs, Homeowners Associations. Now, if you live in Arizona already, you're very familiar with HOAs, Homeowners Associations, because it is very prevalent. In fact, Arizona is the third highest state in the entire country with the most homeowners associations. So it's hard to avoid them altogether if you're looking to buy a house. So you think it's commonplace when you're living in Arizona already. I've been down here selling real estate for 20 years, and I think it's commonplace because you deal with it all the time. But if you don't want to deal with the rest of this video, just go ahead and call us right now, 480-660-5974, or book a time to speak with us on our Calendly link in the description below. But if you live out of state, somewhere else in America, you are shocked when you come down here and you actually realize that most of the homes have HOAs. And you're like, that's not that big a deal. It's just a governing body that helps out. But is it more than just that? Well, I'm glad you asked. It depends on more than just one or two things. Well, according to dictionary.com, a homeowners association is defined as an organization in a condominium or other planned housing community that makes and enforces rules about the appearance and maintenance of properties and that maintains common areas with money from membership fees, otherwise known as HOA. So now you know the book definition of an HOA. Well, an HOA is a group of homeowners that typically come together to help run the community and enforce a certain set of bylaws. But when a community gets pretty large, that actually can transition from that governing initial homeowners to actually a management company. Now, when you get to the management companies, it can get really sticky. It can go downhill fast because these management companies are large companies with a ton of employees. And at the end of the day, their customer service, yeah, well, it stinks. See, when we are asked by a client to sell a property on their behalf, we do a lot of things for them. One of the things that we do is we call the HOA on their behalf so they don't have to deal with it. And let me tell you, an HOA is just a fun, glorious, beautiful experience that we have every time we call. Says no one. Most of the time, it feels like they come in late, leave early, and take a 3-hour lunch, and you can't ever get a hold of anyone to find out what the fees are to make sure that you disclose that to all the parties involved with selling that house. So we just joke in my office that when we die and come back in our next life, we're going to actually own an HOA company because you charge a lot and do very little. At least that's the perception. And sometimes perception, well, it's reality. Yeah, boy. And while we're on it, let's talk about a few other cons with HOAs. You have restricted rules, you have red tape, you have fees, and a lot of fees sometimes. We already touched on customer service. Another one is a lot of things aren't in your control. And the kicker, the worst one of all sometimes, it's hard to believe, but the finances of HOA are a lot of times mismanaged and there ends up being an abuse of power. I know, hard to imagine. But before I'm too harsh on these HOAs, I do want to talk about the positives or the pros, because there are some of those that come with living in an HOA in some cases. And those things are amenities, uniformity, and overall, they usually help hold or increase your property value. So now we're at the part of the video where we're gonna actually have some fun. We're actually talk in detail about some of these pros and the cons, and I'm gonna give you a tip at the very end as to how a pro tip, big time pro tip, how you get around the restrictions, especially when it comes to rental restrictions within your HOA. You don't wanna miss that. Now let's talk about those fees. When you're looking to buy a property in Arizona, the seller has to disclose up front what all the fees that are associated with that HOA are. So you know going into the property, you have a list of 5 homes, you check with your realtor, and before you go see those 5 homes or list of 10 or whatever it is, you want to make sure you look at the sheet and know the HOAs for each property, because sometimes HOA dues might be out of whack, might be too high, and therefore it could throw off your pre-approval if you're getting financing for your purchase. So that's the first thing, to make sure you're fully aware what the HOAs are before you even go look at the house, because why waste your time at the end of the day? Secondly, you found that perfect house, your dream house, and you're ready to make an offer. Well, when you structure that offer, you get to do one of my favorite things for the last 20 years that I enjoy doing every single day with my job, and that is negotiation. You're going to negotiate some of these fees. Not all of these fees are negotiable, but a lot of them are. So let's go over those fees right now. The most common fee that everyone's going to have is a transfer fee. Transfer fee is negotiable for either side of the transaction. The next fee is going to be called working capital or maybe capital improvement fee. Some of these HOAs have weird names for that, but that's going to be the second most common fee. And again, that fee also is negotiable. The third fee as part of the HOA are going to be prepaid HOA dues. Now, typically you only get these when you're buying a condo, but those typically typically are not negotiable. The buyer pays those because the buyer is going to get the benefit of prepaying the first 3 months up front before they move in. And the fourth fee is a disclosure fee. The disclosure fee actually is non-negotiable. That is to be paid by the seller. So whatever that may be with the HOA, typically it's in the ballpark of $200 to $500. The seller will be paying that. And the fifth fee that you may see when you buy a house, typically this fifth fee is only going to be for a luxury type property or in a community that's a little more on the higher end scale. And that's going to be a community enhancement fee, otherwise known as a buyer enhancement fee as well. Now this fee, if your neighborhood has it, and again, most don't, but some do. The higher end ones typically do, in some cases, master plan communities. But if they have this fee, it's going to be typically 1/4 or 3/8 or 1/2 of 1 percentage point of the purchase price that some party in the transaction must pay. See, the seller is going to tell you that it's a buyer fee and therefore the buyer should pay for it. But the reality is, the dirty little secret is that it's negotiable and either side can pay it. And this fee can be fairly large. If you're at 1/2% on $1 million purchase, you're talking $5,000 that someone has to pay when that property closes escrow. And if you're at $500,000, obviously you do the math, cut it in half, you're at $2,500 in that same example that someone has to pay. So it's just one more good reason to have a good representative in your corner to negotiate that aspect for you so that hopefully you don't have to pay it no matter which side of the fence you sit on. Now, once you have all your HOA fees negotiated and all other terms of your contract negotiated and both parties have agreed on a contract, now you go into your due diligence period, your home inspection period in the state of Arizona. And in the state of Arizona, it is 10 days by default. That can be negotiated. But during those 10 days, not only as a buyer are you supposed to do all your due diligence and inspection items, but part of that due diligence is also reviewing the HOA documents, which include their financials.
But Kelly, what if I don't get the financials in the first 10 days and the HOA is slow getting them to me and therefore I don't get them until it's past the 10 days?
Good question. We get that all the time. And most agents actually don't know this, so I'm letting you know so you're fully informed. In the state of Arizona, there is a law on the books, and that law does demand that HOAs do deliver the HOA documents within the first 10 days after going under contract. So most of them do it here, obviously, and they get those out in time. But in the event it's towards the end and you don't have time to review, or if they're late and they come out past the 10 days, then the good news is from the moment you receive the HOA documents and you get them through the title company, your agent should be able to request those on your behalf. You have 5 additional days to actually review all the HOA documents, and if there's anything you don't like in there, which is solely up to you, you can cancel and get your earnest money back. See, a lot of people don't understand that Arizona is a very buyer-friendly state, and you want a representative on your side, whether you're on the buyer or seller side, to help you make sure you work through all these small little nuances of the contract. Another question we get all the time is, what are the average HOA dues in the Phoenix area? Well, that runs the gamut. That is extremely small on one end and high on one end, just depends on what type of property you're buying. But on average, if you're buying a single family tract home in a good sized community, on average, you're going to be looking somewhere in the ballpark of $50 to $60 per month. And what is that going to get you? Well, that's a good question. It's going to get you a community maintenance and to make sure everything looks good in there. And that's about it. And that's why the fee should only be about $50 to $60, sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more, if that's the scenario. But there are HOAs that do provide a lot more. And for those properties and those communities, the HOA dues will be higher. You have communities like Anthem or Norterra that have a lot of amenities with them, where you have a community center and you have activities around that. You have maybe a water slide, you have tennis courts, pickleball courts, and pools and things of that nature. Those HOAs will be more. Then you have guard-gated communities like Greyhawk, DC Ranch, Stonegate, Scottsdale Mountain, and the list goes on. And those are going to be a little bit more than that because you're paying for the human being to be in that guard gate 24 hours out of the day, or at least a good portion of the day for the communities that aren't actually 24 full hours. Now, let's talk about buying a house versus a condo, because the HOA dues and what you get are going to vary greatly in those scenarios. We kind of just covered what you get for the different types of housing that you may choose to buy or communities you may choose to live in. But what if you want to buy a condo? How does that differ? Well, it differs quite a bit. Now, again, these can swing dramatically, but on condos, typically you're going to get a lot more amenities. You're going to have a community pool in almost every single complex. You're going to have other amenities around the grounds of that complex as well, and those may vary, but you're going to have some form of amenities that you will pay for as a homeowner. But the other things that are very important that actually carry a lot of weight are going to be things that most communities cover, like blanket insurance policy, insuring the walls from the walls out, and a roof replacement. So ensuring basically the roof gets replaced, and if there's a leak, they fix it, and repair of the roof. And a lot of HOAs cover the garbage, trash, and water. And so that could be a big value add as well. What they typically won't cover are your electric bill and your internet. With that, you can get your TV if you're doing YouTube TV or Hulu, something like that. So those are the two main things they don't cover, but most HOAs cover the rest of the things that you need in order to live in that property. Now, we talked about not having control being in the HOA, and that is true. You don't have control primarily of what they ask you to do and how much they want to charge if they want to increase the fees. Now, obviously, if you're buying a house, you're disclosed and you know what the fees will be. But that doesn't mean they can't jack the fees up in the future if they have a big capital improvement they have to do. Maybe all the roofs in the condo complex have to be replaced, or maybe they have an irrigation leak in the community and the green belt that kids go and play at floods all the time. They have to repair that huge leak. They have to dig up concrete. Whatever it may be, there are things that are outside your control. Especially, most lately, insurance, guys. The cost of insurance has skyrocketed across America. Arizona is no different, and that causes the insurance rates for the community to go up, and therefore your HOA dues will go up as well. But the main thing is to make sure when you're buying the house, you review the financials and you make sure there's not a special assessment already on the books scheduled at some point in the future, because if that's the case, at least you can avoid that if you want. What you can't avoid is if they choose to do it a year from now or whatever it may be, which they can and do have the power to do. And not to mention other things that are outside of your control are like the paint color of your house. You can't paint your house blue. I hope you don't want to paint it blue regardless, but if you want to paint it an offshoot of the brown tone, but it's not the brown tone they choose in their CC&Rs, their rules, then unfortunately you can't do that brown or whatever shade of a color you may want to do. It has to be approved by the HOA. Paint color, color of your front door, weeds in your yard, the amount of plants or trees that you have in your front yard. A lot of times in the backyard, they'll leave you alone, but in the front yard, they'll get you, because a lot of HOAs will tell you have to have 5 plants of this size and 2 trees of this size, this type of trees, out of these 5 species, and things like that. It gets really cumbersome, and then it's very subjective, which is very tough for me, because I look at it and I look at it and go, wow, you just told me I'm going to get fined if I don't paint the exterior of my house because it's faded. Well, what does faded mean? I look at it and say, I think it looks just fine. But your opinion, unfortunately, doesn't really matter. These HOAs do have an appeal process you can go through, but typically it's very time consuming, and at the end of the day, they kind of take care of their own, and you don't get ruled in favor of too often. Now, back to that study by Rocket Mortgage, they found that 57% of people do not like HOAs, only 43% do. So you have a big contrast, but you still only have 31% of people living within HOAs, even though 43% said they don't mind it. Now let's go back to that study by Rocket Mortgage. Even though Arizona ranked 3rd as the 3rd highest state to have the most HOAs, that's still only 31% of all the residents actually live within the confines of an HOA. So there's still plenty to choose from that do not have HOAs. HOAs came into existence primarily in Arizona in the early 1990s. A lot of major builders came in and bought big parcels of land, and they wanted someone to run them to keep the uniformity of the neighborhoods. But if you're not for HOAs, this is more good news for you. Again, even though Arizona ends up being 3rd with the most HOAs, it actually is 9th in all of America when it comes to HOAs per 1,000 residents. At only 1.37 residents per 1,000 actually live in an HOA. Okay, we're at the end, and now we have the juicy pro tip. That is a good one. So one of the cons of HOA are restrictions, and one of those restrictions they can do are rental restrictions. Now, most HOAs will have a rental restriction of 30 days or more on the lease that is signed. There are some that have 3, 6 months, 12-month restrictions. That's more rare. Most of them have 30 days or more. Why? They're trying to prohibit short-term rentals, Airbnb, VRBOs, and the like. However, if you want to get around that restriction legally, one thing you could do is actually make the tenant a 0.001% owner of the LLC that you actually create to hold the deed and title of the property. Now, it seems like a lot of work to maybe do that, but in the state of Arizona, it only costs you about $85 to create an LLC. It can be done pretty quickly on a rush delivery and done within a matter of 1 or 2 days. So it is possible and may be worth, for certain scenarios, you doing something like that. But again, please, I am not an attorney. This is not legal advice. Please seek out the advice of your favorite real estate attorney. So there you have it. Are you for HOAs or are you against HOAs? I personally do not live in one, but I have lived in one before. I also own some rental properties in HOAs and not in HOAs. And there are pros and cons as we just outlined on this video. But comment below, what do you think? Are you for it or against it? Let us know, and let's get that conversation going below in the comment section. Hope you enjoyed this video and it was educational for you and a little entertainment as well. If you don't mind, give us a call, 480-660-5974, anytime that you want to. We would love to chat with you about any questions about Phoenix, Arizona, and all the surrounding areas, and especially real estate. Don't forget to call me.